I think if Barfield were alive today, he would say it's gotten worse. So the whole notion of a virtual reality, for example, right? So is that turning the two ends back into a circle? And like, is that a kind of participation? Is that a kind of reintegration? I think he would say no. As a literary mode, it's more a satire of participation. It's a parody of participation. It's mock participation.
Mm-hmm.
The further you try to, just reading a book right now, I don't remember the name of the author. I just started it, called Reality Plus. And
Reality Plus?
Mm-hmm. And this person is going to argue that virtual realities are realities. I know that much about what he does. And beyond that, I don't know anything. So it's not a comment on the book here, but
it looks like David Chalmers is the author.
That's right. So I didn't want to say, but that was the name that I had in mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so he's going to argue that the virtual realities are just as real as anything else. And I think it's fair to say, without even looking at his argument yet, that Barfield would be horrified by that, and he would weigh it. But I'm sure he would have a visceral reaction to that as something profoundly unhealthy. If someone were to, not that this person is arguing this at all, but that if someone were inspired just by that idea to sink as deeply into a virtual reality as possible in order to get in contact with the real, that person for Barfield would be disappearing more and more, would be more and more increasingly widening the divide between themselves and reality.
And is that as a consequence of the other participants not being embodied? What element of that experience would be more separating? And I'll give you a little bit of context that's sparking the question. Very personal. So I got pretty involved in virtual reality a few years back, actually as a consequence of my youngest child, who is wheelchair bound. And particularly during COVID, for everyone, of course, the screens were ubiquitous. But I recognized particularly when we moved to Bainbridge Island, which is not very accessible for people who are non-ambulatory. Lots of trails in the woods, but there's not really any sidewalks. And if you've been over here, it's a pretty heavily forested area. And so what I found myself doing maybe 4 or 5 years ago, actually a little bit before that, but make the story short, I was one of those parents, and I have 2 other children, 2 daughters that are older. And I would, that we all do is like get outside and do things, be active. And it really was a near impossibility for him. And I discovered in what we would call virtual reality, metaverse, whatever, that context that he had meaningful exchanges with other people in a way that was not otherwise possible. So I say all that as a little bit of a motivation or an understanding for what's motivating my question as you play interlocutor for Barfield here today.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm not going to do that. That's right. That's too much. But as I try to imagine what he might say, put it like that.
Yeah.
That there's something, I think I can imagine him saying that there's something real in the exchange that your son is having with these people. And that there's a communication, a sharing of ideas there and experiences and whatnot with these other people that is made possible by the virtual reality, but isn't a part of the virtual reality.
Okay.
So Barfield has an essay called The Harp and the Camera that kind of speaks to this.
Interesting.
And it's a wonderful essay in rediscovery of meaning. It's kind of a favorite for a lot of people. So he contrasts these two. What's the difference between a harp and a camera as modes of art and modes of expression? And what the camera does is it's parasitic in relation to reality, right? So it's kind of presenting you. In other words, the metaverse is made up of objects that are imitations of objects in the real world.
Sure.
And the photographic enterprise is to simulate something that exists apart from the real world, quote unquote. We're being so loose with these terms, or whatever.
Yeah.
The real world, whereas the harp, what are you creating there? You're not imitating anything. Exactly. So it's much more the product of the interactivity, whether through inspiration or whatnot, the interactivity of the artist meeting the instrument, and out of that interaction, creating something new that then meets an audience. Right? And so that's, I think, closer to Barfield's picture of what it is to create a community, what it is to have artistic inspiration, what it is to become integrated yourself in relation to both what moves within you, let's say in the form of inspiration, and wherever you are in the evolution of consciousness, you think about and experience inspiration differently. Maybe it's the muses, maybe it's you had a great breakfast, whatever it may be, and but you feel inspired. And so you have your own integrating within yourself, and then you're able in call it a flow state if you want to, whatever, in this active inspiration, to create something that weaves into the outer world. And I would assume if it's music, it would be especially meaningful if it's weaving into the lived experience of other people. Right. So, yeah, and the virtual is, I think, more, you get further and further away from something like that, the more deeply you get into it. But maybe there are meaningful things that can be excavated from it as well.
Right. Almost, at least in my experience, with respect to those friendships, they now continue on and they have real life get-togethers, as they say, IRL. And perhaps it's an augment or a facilitator that is actually potentially beneficial. I don't know.
Yeah. It's a stand-in, you might say, right?
Yeah.
But it's and so, not to be against it wholesale, but more just to imagine, how should I put it? So I work with adolescents quite a bit, and professionally, and it's hard for me to imagine, I could just be wrong about this, but it's hard for me to imagine a less healthy way of being for an adolescent than to be completely, if you just go take it to the nth degree, to be embedded in the metaverse 23 hours a day, or however much they're awake, whatever.
Yeah.
18 hours a day, embedded in that, so that your only interactions are mediated in various ways, mediated by all these different forms of technology, by all of these simulated environments and so on, such that you almost achieve the Cartesian state of being a brain in a vat. Right. So, because where you are is irrelevant, right? It's the virtual space that matters. So you may as well be totally disconnected from your body. And I would say as a norm, that's probably not a healthy way to be for an adolescent.
I would agree. Can I ask what you're teaching right now?
Well, let me see. So I'm a part of a school that's about to close. So we've gotten very small, unfortunately.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a COVID casualty.
Yeah.
So I'm teaching a group of 12th graders. I'm teaching a group of 6th graders. And with the 12th graders, we've just finished a unit on free verse. So we've been looking at the kind of the history of free verse. And so starting with Whitman and people like that, and coming up through T.S. Eliot and so on. And they're about to write their own free verse poems. And with the 6th grade, so we're just about to start reading The Hobbit. So we're about to get into Tolkien's space.
Very fun.
His virtual reality. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
That's actually, I'm being glib there, but that would be a great, not for this conversation, but a great point of contrast would be Tolkien's, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the term now. Can't believe it.
Subcreation?
Thank you. Yes. Tolkien's notion of subcreation.
Yes.
And just think about that in relation to something like virtual reality, and what are the similarities, of any, what are the differences? And I think the differences are going to far outweigh the similarities.
Yeah. Boy, I'm drifting a bit from, anyway, I have to follow through on this notion. Tolkien, as you mentioned earlier, Lewis, Barfield, these gentlemen were very earnest in their responding to letters. Their work, as you say, was existential. It had deep civilizational meaning. And I've asked this to other guests, so I'll pose it to you. You can answer or deflect, your choice. But again, the thing that really resonates with me is how severely they would have been traumatized by World War I at such a pivotal and instrumental age as young men. And perhaps it's been explored. I don't know. Perhaps I'll explore it myself. But it seems as though that would have scarred them in a way that reinforced the instincts and the inclinations they already had active in their lives.
I think in the case of Lewis and Tolkien, there's been good work done on that. I think that's been studied and seems undoubtedly true. Barfield did not experience combat.
Right.
But he did, his earliest stories include characters who were damaged by the war.